Hello there, gentle dreamers. Tonight, we journey to Mystic Falls, Virginia, a small town where founding families keep old secrets, where the past refuses to stay buried, and where a girl carrying fresh grief is about to discover that the world contains far more darkness and far more wonder than she ever imagined. At the center of everything is Elena Gilbert, and arriving at the edges of her quiet, ordinary life is Stefan Salvatore, a vampire who has not felt anything worth feeling in a very long time. So, settle in now, and let Mystic Falls carry you softly into the night. There is a particular quality to small towns that have existed long enough to accumulate secrets, a heaviness in the air that is difficult to name precisely, but impossible to ignore once you have learned to feel it. A sense that the streets and the buildings and the very soil beneath them hold memories that the official histories have chosen not to record, and the official voices have chosen not to acknowledge. That the pleasant surface of civic life is maintained not through the absence of darkness, but through the collective agreement to look away from it whenever it threatens to become visible. Mystic Falls, Virginia carries this quality in abundance and has carried it for a very long time. A town founded in 1760 with roots deep enough to reach into the darkest chapters of American history. Its streets named for families who built their fortunes and their legacies on foundations that included violence and deception, and the ruthless suppression of anything that threatened the order they had established and intended to maintain across generations, regardless of what that maintenance required. The founding families, the Gilberts and the Fells and the Lockwoods and the Forbeses and the Salvatores, created a community that was outwardly charming and inwardly complicated. A place where civic pride and historical celebration existed, alongside institutional secrets that had been passed down through family lines with the same careful attention devoted to property deeds and family silver, and the particular obligations of inherited wealth and inherited responsibility. They were people who understood that community required not just shared values, but shared silences, that the stability they prized depended on everyone agreeing not to look too closely at certain things, that the price of belonging to a place like Mystic Falls was the willingness to carry its secrets without complaint and without full understanding of what those secrets truly contained. The town itself sits in the rolling Virginia countryside, with a main street that could belong to any prosperous small American community, its storefronts well maintained, and its sidewalks clean, and its civic calendar full of the events that give such places their rhythm and their identity. The Founders' Day celebration is the centerpiece of that calendar, an annual commemoration of the town's establishment that draws the community together with the particular intensity of people who genuinely believe their history is worth celebrating, who have invested enough in the mythology of their origins to feel genuine pride rather than simple obligation when the banners go up and the parade assembles and the founding families take their ceremonial places at the center of things. The high school football team matters here in the way such things matter in places where the radius of consequence is small enough that local achievements feel genuinely significant, where the quarterback is someone everyone's grandmother remembers as a small boy, where winning a game resonates through an entire community rather than disappearing into the vast indifferent noise of a larger world. Beneath that surface charm and civic warmth, Mystic Falls carries a history of supernatural violence that its founding families have spent generations managing and concealing. A tradition of vigilance encoded into the town's institutional memory and maintained through the Founders' Council, an organization operating invisibly beneath the surface of ordinary civic life with a specific and serious purpose. The Council's existence traces back to the events of 1864, when 27 vampires were identified, rounded up, and sealed inside Fell's Church before the building was set alight, an act of community self-defense that the founding families understood as necessary and decisive and final. They built the subsequent century and a half of Mystic Falls history on the assumption that the threat had been contained, that the burning had ended something, that their vigilance was now a matter of prevention rather than response. Sheriff Elizabeth Forbes and Mayor Richard Lockwood carried this institutional knowledge into the present day, maintaining the council's function with the particular commitment of people who have inherited a responsibility they take seriously even when its specific necessity feels abstract and distant. The memory of 1864 preserved in family records and quiet conversations, and the continued production of vervain that the council kept available for those who knew to ask for it. Elena Gilbert was 17 years old when the story of that autumn begins, a junior at Mystic Falls High School, returning to her second year, carrying the particular heaviness of someone who has spent an entire summer trying to reassemble a version of herself from pieces that no longer fit together the way they once did. She had always been the kind of girl who was comfortable at the center of things, not through deliberate social ambition or the aggressive performance of popularity, but through genuine warmth and the natural ease of someone who paid careful attention to the people around her, who remembered the names of people's siblings and the details of problems mentioned in passing weeks earlier, and who asked follow-up questions because she was genuinely curious rather than performing interest for social benefit. People gravitated toward her with the instinctive reliability of plants turning toward light, and she had accepted that gravitational role with the unself-conscious ease of someone who had never had reason to question whether she deserved it. That ease had not survived the accident on Wickery Bridge. On the 23rd of May, her parents Grayson and Miranda Gilbert had driven off the bridge into the dark water below under circumstances that Eleanor herself could not fully account for. The events of that night fragmented and strange in her memory. The sequence of sensation and terror and sudden terrible cold, never quite resolving into a coherent narrative she could examine and understand. She had been in the car. The car had gone into the water. Her parents had not come out of that water, and she had, rescued by someone on the bridge whose face she had never clearly seen, and whose identity she could not subsequently determine regardless of how many times she returned to the memory searching for details she might have missed. Grayson and Miranda Gilbert, a physician and a woman who had made a warm and stable home for her family with the same quiet competence she brought to everything, were gone. And the daughter they had raised was left to understand that the world could simply remove the people who had always been its organizing principle and continue forward without apology or explanation. Jenna Summers, Miranda's younger sister, had arrived from the university where she was completing her graduate studies and taken up residence in the Gilbert house with a love for her niece and nephew that was immediate and genuine, and accompanied by a frank acknowledgement that she was not entirely certain she knew what she was doing. She was in her mid-20s, warm and somewhat scattered, and essentially good in ways that mattered more than competence in those first terrible months, when what Elena and Jeremy needed was not expert management, but simple, reliable presence. Jenna provided that presence with consistency, if not always with grace. Her own grief for her sister running alongside her attempt to be what these two children needed, the household reorganizing itself slowly around the new shape of their loss. Jeremy Gilbert received catastrophe the way 15-year-old boys so often do, by going somewhere inside himself that other people could not reach, and expressing his presence there through the externally visible behavior of someone who had decided not to care about anything. His grades collapsed and his social connections contracted, and he found his way to substances with the resigned efficiency of someone who had identified the most direct available path away from feelings he had no tools to process. His attachment to Vicky Donovan, an older girl from a difficult home whose own relationship with escape was well established, gave his summer a shape and a focus that his sister watched with the particular anxious helplessness of someone who could see the problem clearly and could not find the intervention that would address it. She worried about Jeremy with the focused intensity of someone who had redirected the full force of her grief into the project of keeping her brother safe, understanding that if she stopped worrying about him, she would have to simply feel what had happened to them, and she was not yet capable of surviving that. Bonnie Bennett had been Elena's closest friend since the earliest years of childhood, their friendship the kind built from long accumulation rather than any dramatic moment of connection, reliable and warm and capable of surviving the ordinary stresses of adolescent life without requiring constant maintenance or dramatic renewal. Bonnie was perceptive and funny, and carried a quality of steadiness that made her an anchor for the people who loved her. Her attention to Elena during the summer, following the accident patient and persistent and genuinely helpful in the modest way that being seen and accompanied can be helpful when nothing can actually fix what has broken. She returned to school that September, carrying her own private uncertainty alongside her concern for her best friend, the strange occurrences of the summer sitting in her mind with increasing insistence, the feather that rose without any movement of air, the candle that lit from across the room, the pressure behind her eyes that resolved into images of things that subsequently proved accurate, her grandmother Sheila, the woman the community knew as a warm and eccentric professor of folklore at Whitmore College, spoke about these things not as symptoms requiring explanation, but as inheritance requiring acknowledgement, as the natural emergence of a power that ran through the Bennett bloodline and would make itself known when it was ready, regardless of whether the person carrying it was prepared to receive it. Bonnie was not yet ready, but the power had apparently not consulted her preferences. Caroline Forbes moved through the beginning of that school year with the particular energy of someone whose relationship with her own interiority is organized almost entirely through external activity. Her calendar full and her ambitions clear, and her need for attention and validation operating at the consistent background frequency of something so habitual it had become invisible. She was genuinely kind beneath the performance of social confidence, genuinely loyal to Eleanor and Bonnie beneath the surface competitiveness that expressed her insecurity more than it expressed her actual values. A girl whose best qualities were not the ones most immediately visible, but were nonetheless real and durable in ways that would eventually matter enormously. Her mother was Sheriff Forbes, a practical woman of considerable competence whose institutional role in Mystic Falls supernatural management infrastructure was one of the things Caroline knew nothing about. The council's activities belonging to the category of adult knowledge maintained carefully out of children's sight and reach. Jeremy's attachment to Vicky Donovan had the texture of genuine feeling complicated by the circumstances in which it was occurring, both of them seeking something in each other that neither was quite equipped to provide. Vicky worked at the Mystic Falls Grill, navigated her difficult home life with the worn pragmatism of someone who had been doing so for years without adequate support, and accepted Jeremy's company with the casual affection of someone who had not been taught to expect anything more deliberate or more carefully considered. Her brother Matt, who was Elena's ex-boyfriend and remained part of their extended social world, with the determined normalcy of someone committed to surviving awkwardness through sheer persistence, watched his sister with concern he expressed through practicality, because he had no other available language for it. This was Mystic Falls on the 23rd of August, the last morning of summer and the first morning of everything that would follow it. The town went about its business in the warm, late summer light, with the unhurried ease of a place that believes it knows itself completely. Its secrets settled into their familiar positions beneath the surface, its history wearing its civic costume with practiced ease. Eleanor Gilbert wrote in her journal that she did not know who she was supposed to be now, that everything she had understood about herself had been organized around people who were gone, that she was going to walk back into those familiar hallways and smile and say she was fine because there was no available alternative to that particular performance. She did not know that someone had stood at the edge of Wickery Bridge on the night her parents died, had watched her face emerge from the dark water, and had felt something stir in him that had not moved in longer than she had been alive. She did not know that his stillness at that bridge had been a choice, and that the choice had been the beginning of something rather than the end of a moment. The summer was ending, and something older than the town's oldest memory was preparing to come home. Stefan Salvatore had not been back to Mystic Falls in 15 years, and before that absence there had been another, and before that one another still, the town appearing and receding in his long existence with the irregular rhythm of something he could not stay away from permanently, but could not remain close to without cost. He had been born here in 1846, had grown up within sight of the Salvatore estate with its broad lawns and its careful gardens, and his position among the founding families that his father Giuseppe wore as identity rather than simply circumstance, had learned to ride and to read, and to understand the particular obligations of a young man of his station in a Virginia that was already moving toward the catastrophic fracture that would define the middle of that century. He had died here, in the most literal and permanent sense of that word, and had woken here as something else, and had watched here as everything he understood about his human life collapsed into ash and grief, and the terrible new reality of what he had become. Mystic Falls was the place his existence had broken open, and the place he returned to despite everything, drawn back across the decades by the particular gravity of origin that nothing in his long experience had taught him to fully resist. He was, by the autumn of 2009, 162 years old, though the body he inhabited showed nothing of that accumulated time, frozen at the age of 17 by the transformation that had ended his human life and begun something that he had spent the intervening century and a half trying to make worthy of continuation. He was lean and dark-haired, with features that suggested thoughtfulness rather than simply youth, and he moved with the particular deliberateness of someone who had learned across decades that drawing attention to oneself carried consequences, that the most effective way to exist in human spaces was to occupy them quietly and carefully, and to give people as little reason as possible to look closely at the things that would not survive close examination. He'd been practicing that particular art of careful invisibility for longer than the country he lived in had existed in its current form, and he was exceptionally good at it. His return to Mystic Falls in the late summer of 2009 was not impulsive. Stefan Salvatore was not, by nature or by long cultivation of self-discipline, a person who acted impulsively on anything. His relationship with his own impulses having been shaped by the understanding that for someone like him, impulse carried consequences that no ordinary recalibration could repair. He had watched Elena Gilbert's face emerge from the dark water beneath Wickery Bridge on the 23rd of May without intending to be there, had been passing through rather than lingering, and the sight of her had stopped him with a physical completeness that still unsettled him months later when he examined it honestly. It was not simply the resemblance, though the resemblance was extraordinary and demanded explanation he did not yet have. It was something in the way she had surfaced from the water, gasping and alive and immediately searching for her parents, the specific quality of her presence in that terrible moment, the particular person visible in her face even through shock and terror and grief, that had reached through his careful detachment and found something he had believed thoroughly insulated against that kind of reaching. He came back to find out who she was. He understood that about himself clearly enough, and he understood that the understanding did not make the decision wise, that returning to Mystic Falls to pursue proximity to a 17-year-old human girl for reasons he could not entirely articulate was not the kind of choice his better judgment would endorse on careful reflection. but he had been practicing careful reflection for 145 years, and he admitted privately, exhausted by the particular discipline of keeping himself away from anything that might matter. He enrolled himself at Mystic Falls High School, compelled the relevant administrative personnel to accept his documentation without difficulty, and arranged accommodation at the Salvatore boarding house, which had passed through various hands across the decades, but which still bore his family's name on its deed through arrangements too old and too carefully constructed to have dissolved in his absence. The boarding house sat at the edge of town, with a particular presence of old buildings that have absorbed the emotional texture of everything that has occurred within them. Its rooms large and its ceilings high, and its library still containing books that Stefan himself had placed on those shelves in previous decades. The furniture different, but the bones of the place unchanged in ways that made his return feel simultaneously familiar and deeply strange. He had always found the house more bearable than other locations in Mystic Falls, precisely because his specific memories of it were complicated rather than simply devastating. The grief it held belonging to a different category than the sharper losses concentrated elsewhere in the town. He began keeping a journal again upon his return, a habit he had maintained with varying degrees of consistency across his long existence, the discipline of writing offering something that the discipline of simply enduring did not. A way of processing experience that required him to find language for things he might otherwise allow to pass unexamined. The journal of that autumn began with his honest acknowledgement of why he had come back, with his recognition that the resemblance between Eleanor Gilbert and Catherine Pierce was something he needed to investigate rather than flee from, with his understanding that whatever connection existed between those two faces and those two people carried implications he could not assess from a distance. He wrote about Mystic Falls with the complicated affection of someone whose relationship with a place is inseparable from his relationship with his own worst memories, who loves a thing and is wounded by it simultaneously, and has never found a way to resolve that contradiction into something cleaner. His first deliberate encounter with Elena came at the cemetery, where he found her sitting in the early morning quiet of a September day that still carried the warmth of summer without its weight. The light gentle, and the air beginning its slow turn toward autumn. The kind of morning that feels like an ending and a beginning simultaneously. She was visiting her parents' graves with the quiet regularity of someone for whom this particular ritual had become part of the structure holding her together. The act of coming here not morbid but necessary. A way of maintaining connection to people whose absence had reorganized everything she understood about herself. She looked up at him with the directness that he would come to understand was simply her nature, without the practiced social wariness that most people deployed with strangers, and they spoke with an ease that surprised them both. The conversation moving quickly past the courtesies that usually insulated first exchanges and arriving at something more immediate and more honest. He felt the pull toward her with a clarity he had not experienced in a very long time, a quality of attention that went beyond the physical and carried instead the particular recognition of someone encountering a mind that works in ways that are genuinely interesting. a person whose presence makes the space around them feel more substantial, rather than simply more occupied. She was grieving, and she was carrying that grief with a self-awareness that impressed him, not pretending it wasn't present, but also not surrendering to it completely. Maintaining the thread of herself beneath the weight of what had happened with a quiet tenacity that he recognized as genuine strength rather than simple performance of resilience. He was careful in that conversation, and in every conversation that followed. Careful in the way he had learned to be careful with things that mattered, monitoring his own responses with the perpetual vigilance of someone who understood that his caring about something did not make his proximity to it safe or appropriate. His lifestyle had been established through decades of deliberate practice, a response to the understanding of his own nature that he had arrived at gradually and then committed to with the thoroughness of someone who has no patience for half measures once a moral decision has been made. He fed on animal blood exclusively, had done so through long periods of his existence interrupted by darker chapters he did not permit himself to dwell on for reasons that went beyond simple guilt into something more fundamental about his relationship with who he was and who he intended to be. The diet required more hunting and more management than the alternative. The animal blood, less satisfying in the immediate physical sense and requiring greater quantities and greater frequency, but the ethical clarity it provided was worth the practical inconvenience in ways he had long since stopped needing to argue with himself about. He hunted in the woods outside Mystic Falls before school each morning and after, returning from wherever Eleanor's presence had kept him in the evenings. The woods large enough and the deer population sufficient for his needs without drawing attention to unexplained animal deaths that might raise uncomfortable questions. He enrolled at Mystic Falls High with the practiced ease of someone who had enrolled in many schools across many decades. The experience of being a teenage boy, well enough established in his behavioral repertoire that the performance required no conscious effort, though the specific social landscape of each institution required its own mapping and its own set of calibrations. The school was mid-sized and organized around the social hierarchies that characterize such places, the founding family children occupying their expected positions near the top of those hierarchies, the Lockwood and Forbes names carrying the weight of their parents' civic prominence into the hallways and the cafeteria and the athletic fields. He observed it, all with the dual awareness of someone simultaneously inside the experience and standing outside it, participating with sufficient authenticity to be accepted while maintaining the detachment of someone who understood that his participation was limited by nature. Elena introduced him to Bonnie and Caroline with the natural ease of someone who moves through social transitions without excessive awkwardness, and he observed her friendships with the same careful attention he'd been directing at her since the cemetery. Bonnie regarded him with a quality of perception that was slightly different from what he encountered in most humans, a sensitivity that he recognized as something beyond ordinary social intuition, something that suggested she was picking up on registers of his presence that normal human awareness did not typically access. Caroline responded to him with the immediate and transparent interest of someone who had not yet developed the habit of concealing her reactions, her attention warm and direct, and accompanied by the specific quality of expectation that he had learned across long experience to recognize and gently redirect without causing injury. Mystic Falls was already producing its disturbances by the time Stefan arrived to add his own complicated presence to the existing mixture. A crow had been seen following Elena at the cemetery, its behavior unusual enough that she remarked on it without understanding its significance. Fog had rolled in from the lake with an unnaturalness that the meteorologically minded among the town's population found difficult to account for. Vicky Donovan had been found in the woods after a party with wounds on her neck that she could not explain, and a memory of the preceding hours that contained significant and troubling gaps, her confusion genuine and her distress evident, and her inability to articulate what had happened to her more frightening in some ways than a clearer account would have been. Stefan recognized these signatures with the calm recognition of someone who has been reading such signs for a very long time, understood what they indicated about what else had arrived in Mystic Falls alongside himself, understood that the complications he had brought with him by returning were not limited to his own presence, but extended to what his presence had also inevitably drawn. He had hoped for more time. He had hoped that the particular piece of his history that was also its own force of nature would not arrive immediately, would give him at least a season of the proximity to Elena that he had returned for before the reckoning that his return had made inevitable by its nature. But hope, in his experience, operated independently of reasonable expectation, and the crow and the fog and Vicky Donovan's torn throat told him clearly that hope was not going to be granted much runway in this particular instance. He sat in the Salvatore boarding house in the evenings and wrote in his journal and listened to the town settling into its ordinary nighttime rhythms, and understood that the ordinary was going to prove a very thin surface here, thinner even than it usually was, and that the thing moving beneath it was something he had been failing to outrun for 145 years. Damon Salvatore made his entrance into the present-day story of Mystic Falls the way he made his entrance into most situations, with the particular combination of beauty and menace that had served him across 145 years of existence as both weapon and armor simultaneously, his appearance so immediately disarming and his charm so apparently effortless that the danger underneath it registered as afterthought rather than primary impression, which was precisely the effect he had spent decades cultivating, and precisely the reason it continued to work with the consistency of something refined through long practice into reliable art. He was tall and dark-haired, with features that suggested classical sculpture given far too much personality. His eyes a pale blue that caught light in ways that drew attention before the rest of him had been fully processed by whoever was looking. His manner carrying the easy confidence of someone who had long ago stopped concerning himself with whether people liked him, because he had discovered that making people like him was simply a skill he possessed and could deploy at will, rather than an outcome he needed to invest genuine feeling in pursuing. He was born in 1839, 7 years before Stefan, the elder Salvatore's son, and the one on whom Giuseppe Salvatore had concentrated the particular intensity of his paternal expectations from the beginning. the weight of the family name and the family legacy pressing down on Damon from early childhood, with the specific heaviness of a father who loved his son primarily as vessel for his own ambitions and his own sense of himself, rather than as a separate person with a separate interior life that deserved recognition and accommodation on its own terms. Giuseppe Salvatore was a man of considerable standing and considerable rigidity, his identity organized so thoroughly around his position among the founding families and his community's perception of him, that any deviation from the image he had constructed threatened something he experienced as existential rather than simply social. He expected his eldest son to reflect that image faithfully, and was consistently disappointed by a boy who was too intelligent and too restless and too fundamentally unwilling to perform convictions he did not hold, whose charm was genuine, but whose deference was always slightly theatrical in ways that Giuseppe sensed without being able to articulate precisely what was wrong. Damon had been, by every account preserved in Stefan's memory of those years, genuinely brilliant and genuinely difficult and genuinely hungry for something that the life his father had mapped out for him was constitutionally incapable of providing, his restlessness evident even in boyhood, his capacity for feeling always operating at a register that the social structures of his time and place had no adequate container for. He was the kind of person who loved with the same intensity he brought to everything else, which made him both magnetic and dangerous in ways that the people closest to him felt before they understood. The force of his personality something that could illuminate or consume depending on circumstances, and depending on how well the people in his proximity understood what they were dealing with. His relationship with rules and expectations had always been organized around the question of whether they served his purposes, rather than whether they deserved his deference, a quality that his father experienced as defiance, and that was perhaps more accurately understood as the refusal of a genuinely independent mind to pretend at convictions it could not honestly claim. He had served in the Confederate Army not from any deep ideological conviction, but from the inevitable momentum of being a young Virginia man in 1861, with a father whose expectations left limited space for alternative choices, and had returned from that experience carrying something darker and considerably more restless than what he had taken into it, the war having stripped away whatever remained of the social programming that had kept his more disruptive qualities operating within recognizable boundaries. He came home to the Salvatore estate and encountered Catherine Pierce, and everything that followed from that encounter had defined the next century and a half of his existence with a completeness that rendered all prior context essentially preliminary, a prologue to the story that would come to matter more than any other chapter of what he was. The story of what Damon had become by the autumn of 2009 was in significant part the story of what loving Catherine Pierce and losing her had done to a person who had never developed adequate insulation against his own capacity for feeling, who had responded to devastating loss not by grieving and integrating and finding some way to carry the weight forward, but by constructing an entire alternative identity organized around the performance of not caring about anything, around the deliberate weaponization of his own pain as entertainment for himself and disruption for everyone else. around making the world as uncomfortable as possible, as consistent demonstration that he was not the person who could be touched by it or wounded by it, or made to feel the specific quality of helplessness that came from loving something he could not keep. The cruelty was real, and its consequences for the people who encountered it were genuinely serious, but beneath it, and driving it with the consistency of an engine running on a fuel source that showed no signs of depletion, was something that was simply grief, profound and ancient and unprocessed. Wearing a costume it had been wearing for so long that even Damon himself had largely forgotten what the original feeling looked like before it transformed into this particular performance of indifference and appetite and gleaming destructive energy. His stated purpose in returning to Mystic Falls was the one that had organized his existence for 145 years, with the focused persistence of an idea that had calcified from goal into identity across the decades of its maintenance. Catherine Pierce was sealed in the tomb beneath Fells Church, had been there since 1864, and he intended to find the means to open that tomb and bring her out of it and back into a world that had continued without her, while he waited with a faithfulness that he would have found embarrassing to acknowledge in those terms. But that was nonetheless the accurate description of what he had been doing. He had spent the intervening century and nearly half of another accumulating the specific knowledge and the specific artifacts and the specific connections required to accomplish this. The goal giving his existence the organizing principle that prevented it from dissolving into simple hedonism without direction or purpose. He did not examine the belief that Catherine was waiting for him too carefully. Examining it too carefully would have required him to sit with questions whose answers might have made the entire structure of his continued existence feel hollow in ways he was not equipped to manage. Stefan knew things about Catherine and about what had actually occurred in 1864 that Damon did not know. Truths that transformed Damon's century of faithful, purposeful waiting into something considerably closer to tragedy than to devotion rewarded. And Stefan had been carrying this knowledge with the complicated guilt of someone who had made a decision about what to reveal and what to withhold, and had been living with the weight of that decision ever since without arriving at any satisfactory resolution of whether he had chosen correctly. The specific nature of what Stefan knew would emerge in its own time, with the inevitability of things that have been suppressed long enough to develop pressure behind their containment. But in the immediate present of that autumn, it sat between the brothers as unspoken and enormous weight. One more layer of complexity deposited onto a relationship that had been accumulating layers across 145 years, until the original connection beneath them was very difficult to locate without deliberate excavation. Their dynamic in the present day was the dynamic of two people performing antagonism with the fluency of something rehearsed across decades into automatic response. Damon appearing at the boarding house with the casual proprietary ease of someone who considered his right to occupy any space self-evident regardless of what the current occupant preferred. His provocations precise and consistent and calibrated less to achieve any practical outcome than to maintain the particular quality of Stefan's discomfort that Damon had apparently decided was the most appropriate inheritance available to him from the circumstances that had destroyed their relationship. He made things worse wherever his attention landed, with the focused efficiency of someone who had elevated that specific activity to genuine artistry. His interventions, theatrical and deliberate, and always organized around maximum impact achieved through minimum apparent effort. The performance of not caring serving simultaneously as provocation and as the armor beneath which the actual person lived in conditions of considerable isolation. Caroline Forbes became Damon's most immediate and most sustained victim in Mystic Falls during those early autumn weeks. A choice that followed its own terrible logic in the particular darkness of how Damon moved through the world. She was proximate to Elena and therefore useful, and she was open and unguarded in ways that made her available to manipulation in ways that more defended people were not. Her genuine warmth and her genuine need for attention creating vulnerabilities that Damon identified and exploited with the casual efficiency of someone for whom other people's emotional architecture was simply terrain to be assessed and navigated, rather than something deserving of respect or protection. He compelled her with the practiced ease of long habit, overriding her will and her judgment and her ability to perceive her own situation accurately with a thoroughness that was all the more damaging for being invisible to the person it was happening to. He fed on her repeatedly across those weeks, the marks on her neck covered by the compulsion that simultaneously prevented her from registering what was being done to her with the clarity that might have prompted her to seek help or resistance. Caroline moved through those early weeks of autumn in a state of compromised perception that nobody around her correctly identified as the damage it actually was. She experienced confusion she could not source, a persistent unease that her conscious mind could not attach to any specific cause. Memory gaps that felt like ordinary forgetting until she looked at them directly and noticed their particular shape and regularity. Her brightness was maintained through the compulsion that was simultaneously hollowing out everything beneath it. Her social performance continuing with the momentum of long habit, while the person performing it was being steadily undermined in a way she lacked the framework to understand or articulate. The bruises on her neck that she covered and did not fully examine. The mornings when she woke feeling drained in ways that sleep had not addressed. The moments when Damon looked at her with an expression that her compelled mind refused to accurately interpret, even as something in her deeper instincts responded to it with the specific quality of fear that the body produces when it understands something the conscious mind has been prevented from accessing. Stefan's response to his brother's arrival and his brother's behavior followed the pattern of someone who had been managing this particular situation across long enough experience to have developed a methodology, however imperfect, for containing the damage without escalating the conflict into territory that Damon was specifically constituted to win. Direct confrontation produced nothing useful and considerable entertainment for Damon, whose enjoyment of Stefan's distress was genuine and consistent, and served the additional function of making Stefan's emotional responses feel like further defeats to be absorbed with as much equanimity as possible. The approach that experience had taught Stefan was more effective was containment and intervention, without engagement, limiting the damage wherever he could identify it, without providing Damon the satisfaction of visible reaction to each new provocation. The vervain necklace he gave Elena in those first weeks carried more weight than its presentation suggested. The small glass vial on its delicate chain, framed as thoughtful gift rather than protective measure. The vervain inside protecting her from compulsion through the plant's specific properties, without Elena needing to understand yet what she was being protected from or why the protection was necessary. She accepted it with the uncomplicated warmth of someone who received gestures of care at face value and valued them as expressions of feeling rather than examining their practical architecture. Wearing it from the moment it was given to her with the naturalness of someone who has incorporated an object into their sense of themselves without deliberate decision. Stefan watched her wearing it with the quiet relief of someone who has secured one essential protection while remaining aware of how many other vulnerabilities exist and how inadequate any single measure is against the full scope of what Damon represented. The Founders' Council conducted its institutional vigilance in the background of all these events with the practiced consistency of people fulfilling obligations they had inherited rather than chosen. Sheriff Forbes and Mayor Lockwood maintaining their protocols and their preparations and their community of awareness with the seriousness of people who believed in their purpose even when its necessity felt abstract. Logan Fell moved through his role as council-adjacent figure with a particular combination of genuine belief in the vampire threat and dramatic underestimation of what an actual encounter with that threat would involve. His possession of the Gilbert watch giving him a sense of capability that his actual preparation did not support. The town's institutional memory of 1864, preserved through the council's careful maintenance across the intervening generations, kept the community's defensive posture alive, even as the specific nature of the current threat remained imprecisely understood by the people tasked with responding to it. Mystic Falls settled into the rhythms of its autumn with the surface normalcy of long practice, the school year establishing its patterns and the Founders' Day preparations moving forward, and the ordinary life of the community proceeding with the momentum of a place that has learned to carry extraordinary things inside its ordinary routines without allowing the weight to show. Beneath that surface, the disturbances accumulated with the quiet inevitability of pressure building behind containment. Each incident small enough individually to be absorbed and explained and set aside, collectively beginning to describe something that patience and attention would eventually resolve into a picture that could not be dismissed or explained away. The crow continued its appearances. The fog rolled in from directions that made no meteorological sense, and in the boarding house at the edge of town, two brothers who had destroyed each other 145 years ago continued their long performance of mutual damage, the town around them carrying its secrets into the cooling September nights without yet understanding that its oldest secrets had come home. To understand what Darman Salvatore was in the present, and to understand what Stefan carried in the particular silence he maintained around certain subjects, it was necessary to travel backward through 145 years to a Virginia spring that smelled of magnolia and gunsmoke, and the specific anxiety of a country coming apart at its seams. to a moment when both brothers were still human and still capable of the uncomplicated feeling that transformation and time and loss would subsequently make so difficult. The year was 1864, and the Salvatore estate was hosting a guest whose presence would reorganize everything within its radius with the quiet thoroughness of a current that looks gentle on the surface and pulls with extraordinary force beneath it. Catherine Pierce arrived at the Salvatore estate in the spring of 1864 with the particular timing of someone who understood how to make an entrance, the Civil War providing a context of disruption and displacement that made the appearance of a beautiful young woman seeking temporary refuge seem entirely natural and entirely explicable. Her story of being without family or permanent home resonating with the kind of sympathetic logic that wars reliably produce. She was dark-haired and dark-eyed, and possessed of a beauty that operated on multiple registers simultaneously. The kind of appearance that caused people to notice her before they had decided to, and to keep noticing her after they had decided they should probably stop. Giuseppe Salvatore offered her the hospitality of the estate with the formal generosity of a man of his station, and Catherine accepted with the graceful appreciation of someone who'd been navigating the hospitality of powerful men for considerably longer than her apparent age suggested. She was, though neither brother knew this at the time, a vampire. She'd been born Katerina Petrova in Bulgaria in 1473, had fled her homeland under circumstances that had everything to do with the specific supernatural significance of her bloodline, and had been running and surviving and reinventing herself across nearly 4 centuries by the time she arrived at the Salvatore estate, wearing her American alias and her carefully constructed vulnerability. She was a doppelganger, the latest in a line of women who bore the same face across generations, a face that carried supernatural significance connected to an ancient and powerful original vampire named Klaus, whose interest in the doppelganger bloodline made Catherine's continued survival dependent on her continued elusiveness and her perpetual willingness to use whatever tools were available to her to remain one step ahead of the thing pursuing her. She did not share any of this with the Salvatore brothers. She shared other things with them instead. Both brothers fell in love with her, which was less a coincidence than a predictable consequence of what Catherine was and what she was doing. Her cultivation of their mutual attention deliberate and precise and organized around purposes that had more to do with her own survival calculations than with any genuine feeling for either of them. She met with Stefan in the afternoons with a quality of earnest intimacy that made him feel uniquely seen. Her apparent interest in his interiority and his sensitivities and his moral seriousness, creating the impression of a connection that went beyond the physical into genuine recognition of who he actually was beneath the social performance his father required of him. She met with Damon in the evenings with a different register entirely. Her engagement with his restlessness and his irreverence and his barely concealed contempt for the conventions that constrained him, feeding the specific hunger of someone who had always been told that the qualities making him difficult were the qualities making him wrong, who needed someone to tell him that those qualities were instead what made him extraordinary. She gave both brothers her blood without their understanding of what that meant, or what it would eventually make possible, the act framed within the intimacy of their separate relationships with her, rather than explained as the preparation it actually was. She was, in ways she understood completely, and they understood not at all, ensuring that they would survive what was coming, or at least survive it in the particular form that transformation, rather than simple death, would produce. Whether this constituted care for them, or simply contingency planning organized around her own needs, was a question that the subsequent century and a half did not resolve with any satisfying clarity. Giuseppe Salvatore discovered Catherine's nature through means that the historical record preserved imprecisely, some combination of his council connections and his own vigilance, producing the information that his guest was the specific category of threat that the founding families had organized themselves to eliminate. His response was immediate and organized around his civic identity, rather than any paternal consideration for what his son's feelings about Catherine might mean for their well-being. His decision to participate in the vampire roundup of 1864, apparently uncomplicated by the knowledge that both his sons had developed significant attachments to the creature he was helping to condemn. He was a man for whom principle, or at least the performance of principle, consistently outweighed personal loyalty when the two came into conflict, a quality that he experienced as moral seriousness and that his sons experienced as betrayal of a more fundamental order of obligation. 27 vampires were rounded up in Mystic Falls during those spring weeks, gathered through the coordinated effort of the founding families and their associates, and delivered to Fells Church, where Emily Bennett, a young black woman who served as Catherine's handmaiden and who possessed genuine and considerable witch abilities, was compelled to cast a spell that sealed the church before the founding families set it alight. The official history recorded this as the elimination of a vampire threat, a decisive act of community self-defense that made Mystic Falls safe for its human population and demonstrated the capability and the resolve of its founding families. What the official history did not record was everything else that happened in connection with those events, the specific human costs and the specific betrayals and the specific sequence of choices that transformed two young men into something that would outlast the century their human deaths belonged to. Stefan was shot by his own father after revealing the location of the vampires, a consequence of his attempt to protect Catherine that Giuseppe treated as evidence of corruption, rather than as the love it actually was, his willingness to end his son's life for what he understood as treason against the community, a measure of how completely his civic identity had consumed whatever paternal feeling he might otherwise have acted on. Damon was shot in his own attempt to reach Catherine before the church burned, his purpose the same as Stefan's, and his outcome equally fatal. Both brothers died with Catherine's blood already in their systems from the intimacy of the preceding weeks, and death with the vampire's blood in the body produced under the right circumstances, the beginning of transition rather than the end of everything. The right circumstance was feeding on human blood within the transition period, completing the change that Catherine's blood had made possible. And Stefan completed his transition while Damon, in those first critical hours, refused. Stefan fed, and in feeding crossed the threshold from dying human into new vampire, and in crossing that threshold lost the human life that his father had ended and gained the immortal existence that would carry him forward into a future he had not chosen and could not have imagined. Damon's refusal was the refusal of someone who had decided that if Catherine was gone, then continuation was not a sufficient motivation for the specific act required to achieve it. His willingness to simply end in those transitional hours, expressing the depth of what losing her had cost him more clearly than any statement of feeling could have. Stefan fed Damon his own blood to complete his brother's transition, an act whose motivations contained everything that their relationship had ever been and would subsequently struggle to remain: genuine fraternal love, expressing itself through the most concrete intervention available, ensuring his brother's survival in a moment when Damon had decided not to ensure it himself. Damon woke as vampire with the specific fury of someone who had been saved against his wishes, his grief and his rage, and his sense of having been robbed of even the choice of ending now added to everything else he was carrying. The love behind Stefan's intervention, invisible to him in that moment, beneath the weight of what he understood as one more instance of Stefan deciding what was best without adequately consulting the person most affected by the decision. The founding families, including Giuseppe Salvatore, believed the church burning had ended the threat completely, had destroyed all 27 vampires sealed within it, and resolved the situation with the finality of fire. They were wrong about this in ways that would not become fully apparent for 145 years. Emily Bennett, in the moments before she was compelled to seal the church, had cast a preservation spell on the vampires inside, her loyalty to Catherine extending to the community Catherine had been part of, her witch's power sufficient to maintain them in a sealed state rather than allowing the fire to destroy them. The tomb beneath the church held its occupants in suspension, conscious of their imprisonment, unable to act, waiting in the particular darkness of a supernatural confinement that the founding families believed was simply ash and resolved history. In the present day of 2009, this history lived in the Salvatore boarding house with the specific weight of things that have never been adequately processed. The brothers occupying the same space and the same shared past from positions that had diverged so completely across the intervening decades that their experiences of those original events might have belonged to different stories entirely. Stefan carried the guilt of surviving when Catherine had not, and the deeper guilt of the specific knowledge he held about what had actually happened to her that he had chosen not to share with his brother. The reasons for that choice genuine, but the consequences of it enormous. Damon carried the century-long certainty that Catherine was alive in the tomb, that his purpose in existing was to free her, that everything he had done and everything he had been across 145 years was in some fundamental sense justified by the faithfulness it represented. Elena's research into her own resemblance to Catherine was proceeding quietly alongside these larger historical currents. Her discovery of an old photograph in the Gilbert family records, showing a face identical to her own, wearing 1920s clothing, producing the specific quality of disorientation that came from encountering evidence that undermined assumptions so fundamental they had never required examination. She brought it to Stefan with the directness that characterized her approach to things she needed to understand, and his response to the photograph the careful management of his expression that did not entirely succeed in concealing the complexity of what seeing it produced in him, told her something important about what the resemblance meant even before he found words for it. The connection between Elena's face and Catherine's face was not coincidence and not simple genetic accident, and Stefan's awareness of its significance ran considerably deeper than anything he was yet prepared to share with her in those early weeks of their relationship, when trust was still being established and the full weight of what he carried had not yet been laid out between them in the careful way it eventually would need to be. The vampire lore of Mystic Falls accumulated across generations of council activity and preserved in the Gilbert family records that Elena's father had maintained with a thoroughness she was only beginning to appreciate, described the properties and the vulnerabilities that structured supernatural existence in ways the founding families had learned through direct and often costly experience. Vervain weakened vampires and prevented compulsion in those who carried it. Vampires could not enter a human residence without invitation from a resident, the threshold representing a genuine supernatural boundary rather than simply a social convention. Sunlight was lethal without the protection of spelled jewelry, rings, and other objects enchanted by witches capable of providing the protection that allowed vampires to move through daylight hours without destruction. These were not myths or folklore, but operational realities that the Council had verified across generations of direct encounter, and they structured the invisible architecture of the situation developing in Mystic Falls that autumn, with the specificity of rules that applied consistently regardless of whether the people operating within them fully understood what governed them. There are kinds of inheritance that arrive without announcement or preparation, that make themselves known not through formal transmission, but through the gradual accumulation of experiences that resist ordinary explanation, until resistance itself becomes more exhausting than acknowledgement, until the evidence has assembled itself into a weight that exceeds the capacity of even the most determined skepticism to continue supporting. Bonnie Bennett had spent the better part of her adolescence treating her grandmother's talk of witches and bloodlines and ancient power as the colorful mythology of a woman she loved deeply and took seriously in almost every other respect, the folklore of their family history, something she received with affectionate tolerance rather than genuine consideration, filed alongside the other things that belong to the category of grams being grams, rather than the category of things requiring her direct and personal attention. The summer following the accident on Wickery Bridge had reclassified that material without asking her permission. It had begun small enough that individual instances could be absorbed without demanding systemic explanation. The way such things often begin for people whose gifts emerge gradually rather than all at once. A feather rising from the surface of her bedroom desk on a completely still afternoon, lifting and hovering with the unhurried patience of something that had no reason to be doing what it was doing, and was doing it anyway. A candle across a room igniting without match or lighter or any source of heat that Bonnie could identify when she crossed to examine it. The flame burning with complete normalcy, once established as if it had always been there, and the question of how it arrived was simply not worth addressing. These were small enough, isolated enough, explicable enough, through the generous application of coincidence and inattention that Bonnie applied to them initially, with the practiced efficiency of someone who had decided in advance that a particular category of explanation was not available to her, and therefore arranged her interpretation of events to avoid requiring it. But the premonitions were harder to dismiss, arriving as they did with the specific physical signature of pressure, building behind her eyes and then releasing into images that arrived with the quality of memory rather than imagination, vivid and particular, and accompanied by a certainty of significance that ordinary daydreaming did not produce. She saw Eleanor's face in one of them before the school year began, saw her friend surrounded by something dark and enclosing, saw the specific quality of danger that she could not translate into concrete terms, but that her body responded to with the physiological certainty of genuine warning rather than simple anxiety. She saw the boarding house on the edge of town with a clarity that she had not earned through any visit, its particular architecture and its particular atmosphere communicating themselves to her with the specificity of something observed rather than imagined. She saw, most disturbingly, her own hands doing things she did not yet understand, producing effects she had no framework for understanding as possible, and woke from these visions with the specific disorientation of someone who has seen a version of herself she has not yet decided whether to accept. She went to her grandmother. Sheila Bennett received Bonnie's account of the summer's occurrences with the particular quality of attention that Bonnie recognized as her grandmother fully present rather than performing presence. The careful listening of someone for whom this conversation had been anticipated for a long time, and who had decided long ago exactly how she would approach it when it finally arrived. Sheila was a professor of folklore and occult studies at Whitmore College, a position that gave her academic cover for knowledge that went considerably deeper than any scholarly discipline could contain. Her expertise genuine, but her relationship to the material she studied categorically different from that of someone who had learned it from books rather than from blood. She was a witch, had always been a witch, came from a line of witches that extended back through American history and beyond it into the African roots of the Bennett family's oldest ancestry, the power moving through her as naturally and as continuously as anything else that constituted her physical existence. She explained this to Bonnie with the calm directness of someone delivering information rather than making an argument, not trying to persuade but simply describing reality as she understood it and allowing Bonnie the space to process that description at whatever pace her particular combination of intelligence and resistance required. The Bennett line, she said, was one of the most powerful witch bloodlines in the known supernatural world. There, magic nature-based and ancestrally connected, drawing on the power of the Bennett witches who had lived and died before them, and who remained accessible to the living members of the line through the particular practice of calling on their ancestors that the tradition had maintained across generations. This was not metaphor or mythology. It was operational reality that Sheila had practiced and relied upon throughout her adult life, and it was the inheritance that was now making itself known in Bonnie, with the timing of something that had always been present, but was now insisting on acknowledgement. Bonnie's great-great-great-grandmother Emily Bennett, had been among the most significant figures in the supernatural history of Mystic Falls. Her presence in the town during the events of 1864, making her central to everything that had occurred and everything that continued to reverberate from those events into the present. Emily had served as Catherine Pierce's handmaiden, a relationship that existed within the social structures of that era, and that contained its own complicated layers of power and obligation, and genuine connection that resisted simple characterization. She was the witch who had been present when the founding families rounded up the 27 vampires and delivered them to Fell's Church, the witch whose power had been used to seal the church before the burning, and the witch who had, in the moments of that casting, made additional choices that the founding families did not know about and had not sanctioned. Emily had preserved the vampires in the tomb through her own decision and her own power, extending her loyalty to Catherine's community into an act of preservation that the founding families understood as simple destruction. She had also, in the aftermath of those events, made arrangements with Damon Salvatore that were structured as transaction rather than gift, providing him with spell jewelry that would allow him and Stefan to walk in daylight in exchange for his promise to protect her lineage, to ensure that the Bennett family would be safe from vampire predation across whatever future unfolded from that terrible autumn. The sunlight rings that the Salvatore brothers wore, and the daylight jewelry that would eventually be central to other vampires' ability to move through the world safely, trace their origin to Emily Bennett's craft and Emily Bennett's decision to extend her protection even in the midst of catastrophe. This meant that the Bennett witches' history was not simply adjacent to the Salvatore brothers' history, but woven through it with a kind of intimate entanglement that made simple separation impossible. Their families connected through acts of power and obligation that had been casting their shadows forward through the generations ever since. Bonnie was not merely a teenager discovering she had unusual abilities. She was the current living representative of a lineage whose choices had shaped the supernatural landscape of Mystic Falls in ways that the present moment was still actively negotiating, whose power was being called into relevance again by the same forces and the same conflicts that had required her ancestors' intervention 145 years earlier. Emily's grimoire existed and was significant, Sheila told her. A record of spells and knowledge and the specific magical workings Emily had performed that represented both practical resource and historical document of considerable importance. The grimoire had been preserved through the Bennett family's careful maintenance across the generations, its contents including the specifics of the tomb spell and the preservation enchantment and the various other workings Emily had cast in connection with the events of 1864. An enchanted crystal given to Damon as part of the arrangement Emily had made with him was connected to the tomb spell in ways that made it potential key to the seal's undoing. Emily having built into her magical architecture a mechanism for reversal that required the crystal and a Bennett witch's power to activate. Damon's possession of this crystal and his understanding of its connection to the tomb was part of what had brought him back to Mystic Falls. his plan requiring a witch capable of channeling Emily's original power through her descendant bloodline, and the only Bennett witch currently accessible to him was the 17-year-old girl who had spent the summer watching feathers rise from her desk and candles light across the room. Bonnie processed all of this with the particular quality of someone whose intelligence was insisting on taking the information seriously, even as other parts of her continued to search for the exit that would allow her to return to simpler understanding. She was a pragmatic person, grounded in observable reality, not naturally inclined toward the mystical or the dramatic, her personality more characterized by steady reliability than by openness to extraordinary possibility. But the feather had risen. The candle had lit. The premonitions had proven accurate in ways that left no available retreat into coincidence. She sat with her grandmother in the quiet of Sheila's house and felt the weight of the inheritance being described to her settling onto her shoulders with the specific quality of something that had always been there but was now, finally, being acknowledged as present rather than politely ignored. Her friendship with Elena took on new dimensions in the context of this knowledge. The supernatural world that Stefano Salvatore represented, no longer something Bonnie could experience as purely Elena's complication rather than her own. She felt the strangeness of the Salvatore brothers in ways she had not been able to name before Sheila's explanations gave her language for what her instincts had been registering since school began. The particular quality of their presence something her, which is sensitivity perceived as categorically different from human presence in ways that were now identifiable rather than simply unsettling. She kept this knowledge close, processing it privately in the way she processed most things of significance, not rushing to deploy it or declare it, but allowing her understanding to develop at the pace her judgment required before she determined what to do with what she knew. The first deliberate expression of her power came in small moments that Sheila guided with patient precision. The lighting of candles through focused intention, the movement of small objects through concentrated will, the basic exercises that established the connection between her internal state and the external manifestation of what she carried. She was gifted in ways that Sheila confirmed with the particular pride of someone seeing potential she had long suspected, now demonstrating itself with the clarity of something ready to emerge, her power responsive and considerable and accompanied by the natural talent that distinguished genuine inheritors of strong bloodlines from those who possessed ability without the ancestral depth that made it reliable and sustainable. The Bennett ancestors were accessible to her in ways Sheila helped her begin to understand. Their accumulated power available to be called upon through the proper practice of the tradition. The dead witches of her lineage not lost, but present in the particular way that things that have been part of a living tradition never entirely depart from it. Mystic Falls was reorganizing itself around the emergence of its supernatural present with the reluctant momentum of a place whose history had always contained this, and whose inhabitants were, each in their own way and at their own pace, being brought into contact with what had always been true about the town they lived in. Bonnie Bennett stood at the center of her own particular version of this reorganization. The girl who had wanted nothing more than to be a reliable friend and a good student and a normal person discovering that normal had never actually been available to her, that the blood running through her veins had been making other arrangements on her behalf for generations, and that the autumn now underway in Mystic Falls was going to require everything those arrangements had been quietly preparing her to become. There are people who move through the world in the particular vulnerability of those who have never been adequately protected, whose lives have been shaped from early on by the absence of the reliable adult presence that allows children to develop the internal architecture of safety, who reach adolescence and then adulthood carrying the specific hollowness of someone who learned too early that the world was not organized around their well-being and adjusted their expectations accordingly. Vicky Donovan was this kind of person. And understanding what happened to her in that autumn required understanding what her life had been before it, the conditions that had made her both sympathetic and fragile in ways that the supernatural world she stumbled into was entirely indifferent to. She was 20 years old, living in a house that her mother passed through with the irregularity of someone whose own needs and her own life consistently took precedence over the practical requirements of the children she'd produced. Her brother Matt, holding the household together with the quiet competence of a teenager who had learned that reliability was his particular role and had accepted that role without complaint, because complaining had never produced results worth the effort. Matt worked at the Mystic Falls Grill alongside Vicky, covered shifts when she didn't show up, made sure there was food in the house, worried about her with the steady, persistent concern of someone whose love expressed itself through practical action, because demonstrative emotion had not been modeled for him in ways that made it feel available. He was a good person in the uncomplicated way that some people simply are. His goodness, not the product of careful moral reasoning, but of basic decency that had somehow survived the conditions of his upbringing intact, and his inability to reach Vicky in the way she needed reaching was not for lack of trying or lack of love. Vicky's relationship with Jeremy Gilbert had the texture of genuine connection, operating within circumstances that made genuine connection difficult to sustain, both of them seeking in each other something that the other was not fully equipped to provide. Their shared comfort in substances and in the temporary relief of company that did not ask too much, creating a bond that was real without being stable, warm without being anchoring. Jeremy's feelings for her were as serious as a 15-year-old boy's feelings could be, which was more serious than adults typically credited, his attachment genuine and his concern for her evident, even in the imperfect ways he expressed it. Vicky received his attention with the casual affection of someone who had not been taught to expect consistency from people who said they cared about her, who valued what Jeremy offered, without allowing herself to rely on it completely, because relying on things completely had historically preceded their removal. She was not a person who deserved what happened to her. This requires stating directly, because the events that followed could, in the wrong telling, acquire a quality of inevitability that implied deserving, as if her circumstances or her choices had produced her fate through some logic or consequence that made the outcome comprehensible as justice, or even simply as cause and effect. They had not. She was a young woman with difficulties and with a history that had not equipped her well for navigating unexpected danger. And what came for her came not because of anything she had done or been, but because she was proximate and available, and insufficiently protected in a town where something genuinely dangerous had arrived and was looking for opportunities. Damon Salvatore's first attack on Vicky in the woods during the party in September was not random, though it was also not specifically targeted in any meaningful sense. His selection of her reflecting the logic of a predator, identifying the most available prey, rather than any particular interest in her as a person. She was at the edge of the gathering, separated from the main group by the combination of substances and the particular restlessness that characterized her movement through social situations. And Damon moved through the darkness of those woods with the ease of something entirely at home in it. His hunger and his boredom and his general contempt for the constraints that Stefan's return to Mystic Falls was apparently supposed to impose on his behavior, combining into the impulsive act of feeding that left Vicky on the ground with wounds on her neck and a memory of the preceding minutes that the compulsion that followed rendered fragmentary and unreliable. She woke confused and frightened, her body registering the physical reality of what had been done to it in ways that her mind could not access clearly enough to process or report accurately, the gaps in her memory producing disorientation rather than clean ignorance, the sense that something serious had occurred without the ability to specify what. She was found, and she recovered, and she returned to her life with the particular resilience of someone who had always had to recover from things without adequate support, carrying the unease of those missing minutes alongside everything else she already carried, without the framework that would have allowed her to understand what it meant or what it indicated about what was present in Mystic Falls that autumn. Damon returned to her. This was the pattern that made what he was doing to Vicky categorically different from a single act of predation. His repeated visits to her establishing a relationship of exploitation that was all the more damaging for being invisible to her through the compulsion that accompanied each feeding. Her confusion deepening with each encounter as her body accumulated the evidence of what was happening, while her mind was systematically prevented from organizing that evidence into coherent understanding. She experienced the aftermath of his visits as inexplicable exhaustion and strange gaps in her evenings, and the persistent, unsettling feeling that she was missing something important about her own experience that she could not locate clearly enough to address. Jeremy noticed her deterioration with the helpless concern of someone who could see that something was wrong and could not identify the cause. His worry translating into increased presence and increased attention that could not actually address the thing undermining her, because neither of them knew what that thing was. The Halloween party was where everything accelerated beyond the point of containment. The combination of the festive chaos and the darkness and Damon's particular mood that evening, producing the impulsive decision that transformed what had been predation into something with permanent consequences for everyone involved. He turned Vicky, fed her his blood, and then killed her in the way that vampire transformation required. the act committed with the casual recklessness of someone making a decision in the moment without adequate consideration of what that decision would produce once its immediate entertainment value had been exhausted. Vicky died at the party in the woods outside Mystic Falls and completed her transition shortly afterward, waking as vampire with no preparation and no understanding, and the overwhelming biological reality of new immortal existence crashing through her nervous system with an intensity that her previous experience of the world had given her absolutely no tools to manage. Stefan found her in those early hours of her transition and tried to help. His experience with his own difficult relationship to the transformation process informing an approach that was genuinely compassionate and practically oriented, aimed at giving her the information and the immediate support that he had never received and had always understood as the deficit that had made his own early existence so chaotic and so dangerous. He brought her to the Salvatore boarding house, attempted to explain what she had become and what she would need and what choices were available to her, kept her away from human blood to prevent the immediate gratification of the bloodlust from making the alternative lifestyle seem impossible before she had given it genuine consideration. Eleanor came, and her presence carried the warmth of genuine friendship, even in circumstances that made warmth feel inadequate and almost absurd. The human girl sitting with the newly turned vampire and offering connection that was real, even if the gulf between their situations had expanded overnight into something that made ordinary friendship complicated to navigate. Vicky could not hold herself together. This was not a moral failure, but a practical one. The specific tragedy of someone encountering a transformation that required extraordinary internal resources at a moment when her entire history had conspired to leave her without the reserves that such a challenge demanded. The bloodlust was immediate and constant and organized around human blood with an insistence that overrode the rational understanding that she needed to find another way. The proximity of human scent in Mystic Falls, an unrelenting pressure that her weeks-old control could not reliably resist. She tried, in the way that people try at things when the trying is insufficient to the scale of the challenge, and the trying produced intervals of relative stability that kept everyone's hope alive through the period of her adjustment, while the underlying trajectory remained pointed toward the catastrophe that arrived with the particular inevitability of something whose conditions had been in place from the beginning. She attacked Jeremy. The specific circumstances carried their own particular darkness. The person she had genuine feeling for becoming the person whose blood called to her with biological urgency, that the feeling was not strong enough to override when her control finally and completely failed. His proximity and her deteriorating state combining in the moment that Stefan had been working to prevent, and that his careful management had delayed but ultimately could not forestall. The attack was interrupted, but not before the reality of what Vicky had become and what that meant for everyone around her had been demonstrated with a clarity that removed the remaining space for optimism about her adjustment. Stefan staked her to protect Jeremy and Elena. The decision made with the specific quality of someone acting from clear moral necessity without any accompanying sense that necessity made the act less terrible, or the grief it produced less real. He had been trying to save her, had invested genuine effort and genuine care in the possibility of her survival as something other than threat to the people he loved. And the failure of that effort was not something he experienced as simple outcome, but as loss. The specific grief of watching someone not make it through the transformation that he had always understood could go either way, depending on factors that were not entirely within anyone's control. Vicky Donovan died for the second time that autumn in Mystic Falls, and this death was the permanent one, the one that did not have a transformation waiting on the other side. Damon compelled Jeremy to forget, an act that occupied the complicated territory between mercy and further violation, removing the specific memory of witnessing Vicky's second death and replacing the acute grief with a duller and less sourced version that Jeremy would carry. Without understanding what he was mourning or why the loss felt so enormous relative to what he consciously believed had happened to her. The compulsion worked in the way compulsion worked, cleanly and completely, leaving Jeremy with the absence of the specific memory and the presence of the grief that the memory had produced. The emotional reality persisting after the narrative that explained it had been removed, which was its own particular kind of suffering. Elena chose to remember. This was not a simple choice or a painless one. Her decision to refuse Damon's offer to remove the memory from her as well, made from the specific conviction that the truth of what had happened deserved to be held by someone regardless of how terrible the holding was. That compulsion as mercy was still compulsion, and that she was not willing to have her own mind managed even by something that presented itself as kindness. She carried the full weight of what she had witnessed, the image of Stefan staking Vicky to protect her brother, the understanding of what the supernatural world she had chosen to remain connected to actually cost when the costs came due, and she carried it without the relief of forgetting and without the comfort of being able to share it with Jeremy, who was now walking around in the benevolent ignorance that Damon had provided him. The aftermath settled over the Gilbert household and the extended social world connected to it with the specific heaviness of grief, whose full dimensions most of the people experiencing it could not access. Matt Donovan lost his sister to an explanation that would never fully satisfy him. The official accounting of her disappearance leaving gaps that his instincts registered as significant even without the information that would have explained them. Jeremy grieved with the unmoored quality of someone whose loss is real, but whose relationship to the specific thing he has lost has been altered by the removal of the memory that would have given the grief its proper shape. Eleanor moved through the days following with a particular awareness of someone who has crossed a threshold and cannot return to the side she came from, who now knows something about the world that permanently changes the quality of her experience of it, who has chosen to stay in it with open eyes and is still in the early stages of understanding what that choice will continue to cost her. The evidence had been accumulating for weeks with the patient consistency of something that intended to be understood eventually, regardless of how many alternative explanations were applied to individual pieces of it, each instance small enough in isolation to be absorbed without demanding systemic reconsideration, and collectively building toward a conclusion that Eleanor's intelligence had been approaching and her emotions had been finding reasons to delay. She was not a person who deceived herself easily or for long. Her self-awareness, one of the qualities that defined her most fundamentally, and the specific discomforts of her relationship with Stefan, had been registering in her with increasing insistence as the autumn deepened, the small wrongnesses accumulating into a pattern that her honest attention could no longer arrange into innocent explanation. There was the matter of his temperature, the particular quality of cool that his skin carried even in warm rooms. Not the ordinary coolness of someone who ran cold, but something more absolute and more consistent. The kind of physical reality that did not vary with circumstance in the way human body temperature varied. There was the speed she had glimpsed at the edges of moments when he moved without thinking about being observed. The fluid, impossible quickness that resolved back into normal human movement before she had fully processed what she had seen. There was his pallor and the quality of his stillness, and the way animals responded to his presence, and the fact that she had never seen him eat, had offered food in social contexts, and watched him redirect the offer with such practiced grace that she had not noticed the pattern until she was already counting the instances and finding more of them than coincidence could account for. There was the vervain necklace, which she had been wearing since he gave it to her, and whose significance she had sensed without being able to specify. His insistence on her keeping it, carrying a weight of genuine urgency that a simple gift did not require. There was Damon, whose effect on people around him was too consistent and too specific to be simply charisma, whose ability to make people do things and forget things and behave in ways that contradicted their evident interests followed patterns that charisma alone could not explain. There was the night of Vicky's attack in the woods, the wounds on her neck and the quality of her confusion and the specific nature of what she could not remember that pointed towards something outside the range of ordinary human violence. Elena went to Stefan's house, to the Salvatore boarding house, with its large rooms and its high ceilings and its atmosphere of accumulated time, and she found the information she had not yet been given through the specific medium of the old documents and the old photographs that the house contained in the unself-conscious way of places that have been continuously occupied across long periods, their history present in the objects left behind by previous inhabitants, rather than carefully curated for presentation. The photograph she found showed a face she recognized immediately and completely. The face she saw in mirrors wearing clothing that belonged to another century entirely, and the specific quality of wrongness that this produced in her was different from the wrongness of all the smaller pieces, because it was not ambiguous, and it did not yield to alternative explanation. She confronted Stefan, and the confrontation had the quality of a moment. Both of them had known was approaching and had been navigating toward from different directions. Elena from the direction of evidence demanding acknowledgement, and Stefan from the direction of genuine feeling, creating obligations of honesty that his careful management of information had been postponing without being able to prevent permanently. She asked him directly, with the characteristic directness that was simply her nature rather than an aggressive strategy, and the question landed between them with the weight of something that had been waiting to be asked. And Stefan looked at her for a long moment with the expression of someone making a final assessment of what the next words would cost and whether the cost was one he was willing to pay. He told her the truth. He was a vampire, had been one since 1864, was 162 years old in the body of a 17-year-old boy who had died in the Civil War era and woken into immortality without choosing it or being fully prepared for what it would mean across the span of existence that followed. He told her about the animal blood diet and the moral framework he had constructed around it, about the decades of practice and self-discipline that had produced the control she experienced as ordinary human steadiness, about the specific nature of his gift and his vulnerability and the ways in which the life he was living in Mystic Falls was both genuinely his and genuinely a performance of something he was not entirely. He told her about Catherine in the careful way of someone providing necessary context while managing the specific sensitivity of a subject that carried implications about his feelings for Elena that were present in the subtext of everything he said about her predecessor's face. Elena ran. This was not weakness, but the entirely reasonable response of a person who had just received information that reorganized the fundamental assumptions of her recent experience, who needed space and movement and the ordinary world rushing past her to process a reality that had no precedent in anything her previous life had prepared her to handle. She drove and she walked and she sat in the dark of her car in the early evening and worked through what she now knew with the methodical intensity of someone whose mind insisted on examining things fully rather than allowing them to remain in the comfortable blur of incomplete processing. She was frightened, genuinely frightened in the specific way that knowledge of real danger produced rather than the free-floating anxiety that imagination generated. And she was also beneath the fear and running alongside it, already engaged in the more complicated work of determining what the truth meant about Stefan specifically, rather than about vampires generally. Because the truth about Stefan specifically was that he had been nothing but gentle with her. That every interaction she could now re-examine through the new lens of what he actually was came back consistent with the person she had experienced him as, careful and attentive and genuinely concerned with her well-being and her safety. His behavior toward her, not the behavior of a predator managing prey, but of someone whose feelings were real and whose restraint was the product of those feelings rather than the mask over their absence. The animal blood, the vervain necklace, the quality of his attention to her that had always felt like being genuinely seen rather than simply observed. These were not the actions of the creature she might have imagined vampires to be, and the gap between the category and the specific person within it was one that her honest assessment could not ignore. She went back to him. The choice was made with clear eyes rather than with the compromised judgment of someone whose fear had been overridden by desire without her awareness. Eleanor's decision to return to Stefan the product of the genuine deliberation she had given herself the space to complete, rather than the impulsive reversal that loneliness or attraction might have produced without adequate reflection. She understood what she was doing. She understood that she was choosing to remain in relationship with someone whose nature created risks that normal relationships did not carry, whose world contained dangers that her own previous life had given her no preparation for navigating, whose presence in her life meant that the distance between herself and the supernatural was not a distance she would be able to maintain. She understood all of this, and she chose anyway, because the person she had come to know across the preceding weeks was someone she was not willing to walk away from simply because the truth about what he was had proven more extraordinary than she had imagined. Their conversation, when she returned, had the quality of something that had crossed the threshold and could not return to the previous side of it. The careful management of information that Stefan had been practicing no longer available as a mode of relating between them, now that the fundamental fact had been acknowledged. He answered her questions with the honesty of someone who had decided that incomplete truth was no longer an available option, explaining the mechanics of what he was and how he functioned, and what the specific vulnerabilities and properties of his existence entailed, giving her the operational knowledge that she would need to navigate the world they were now both inhabiting together. Damon's interference in Elena's processing of this new reality was consistent and precisely calibrated to maximum disruption. His attempts to undermine her trust in Stefan taking multiple forms across the days following her discovery, his approach shifting between direct provocation and the more subtle strategy of providing information that was technically accurate, but framed to produce the most damaging possible interpretation. He told her things about Stefan's past that were true without being complete. His delivery of these truths organized around their capacity to frighten and destabilize, rather than any genuine concern for Elena's informed understanding of her situation. His compulsion failing on Elena, the vervain in her necklace preventing the mental override that had worked so effectively on others, produced in him a response that mixed genuine frustration with something that might, in someone less committed to the performance of not caring about anything, have been recognized as the beginning of reluctant interest. The question of Elena's resemblance to Catherine remained present beneath every other element of their developing relationship, its implications not yet fully surfaced but not ignorable. Stefan's emotional response to Elena, complicated in ways he was honest enough with himself to acknowledge, by the reality of that resemblance and what it meant about the specific history it connected her to. He loved Elena as Elena, had come to understand across the weeks of knowing her that the similarity of face was the extent of the connection, and that the person behind that face was categorically different from Catherine in every way that mattered. Elena's transparency and a genuine warmth and her ethical clarity making her not Catherine with different choices, but a different person entirely, who happened to share a physical configuration that history had loaded with meaning. He told her this, or tried to, with the imperfect articulation of someone navigating genuinely difficult emotional territory, and she received it with the particular grace of someone who understood that complete reassurance was not available, and that honest imperfection was worth more than polished comfort. Caroline's situation remained largely invisible to Elena during this period. The compulsion Damon maintained over her friend operating effectively enough that the signs of damage that Caroline carried were readable as ordinary teenage difficulty rather than supernatural exploitation. Her confusion and her exhaustion, and her intermittent strangeness attributed by those around her to social stress and the particular volatility of her personality, rather than to the systematic undermining of her perception and her will that was actually occurring. Elena watched her friend with concern she could not yet accurately source. The discomfort she felt around Caroline's current state, registering as something not quite right without her new knowledge of the supernatural world, yet connecting the visible symptoms to their invisible cause. The connection would come, as most connections in Mystic Falls eventually did, through the accumulation of evidence that exceeded the capacity of incomplete understanding to contain it. Mystic Falls moved through its October weeks with the particular quality of a place where the surface was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain against the pressure of what was happening beneath it. The ordinary life of the community proceeding with the momentum of habit, while the extraordinary accumulated in the spaces between the ordinary, with an insistence that was approaching the threshold beyond which ignoring it would require more effort than acknowledging it. The infrastructure of vampire awareness that the founding families of Mystic Falls had maintained since 1864 was not a simple thing, not a single document passed between generations, or a private understanding held by one designated family member, whose responsibility it was to remember what the others were permitted to forget. It was an institution, the Founders' Council, with its own protocols and its own membership and its own accumulated body of knowledge about the supernatural threat that the town had been managing in various forms since the original purge, its existence woven so thoroughly into the civic fabric of Mystic Falls that it had become indistinguishable from the ordinary mechanisms of local governance to the people who were not part of it, and entirely natural to those who were. The founding families had understood from the beginning that awareness required structure to survive across generations, that the informal transmission of urgent knowledge through family conversation was too vulnerable to the ordinary disruptions of time and death, and the gradual erosion of belief that occurred when the specific events requiring the knowledge to exist receded into history and became story rather than lived experience. Sheriff Elizabeth Forbes occupied one of the council's central positions with the particular credibility of someone whose professional role in the community gave her vampire hunting responsibilities the institutional legitimacy of law enforcement, rather than the vigilante quality that private action would have carried. She was a practical woman of genuine competence. Her approach to the council's work organized around the same methodical attention to procedure and evidence that characterized her work as sheriff. Her belief in the vampire threat not mystical or emotional, but grounded in the family history and the institutional records that had been passed to her, along with the badge and the specific obligations it carried. She maintained the town's vervain supply, ensured that council members and their households were protected, investigated the unexplained disappearances and unusual deaths that periodically suggested supernatural activity, with the careful thoroughness of someone who understood that the official explanation and the actual explanation were frequently different things requiring different responses. Mayor Richard Lockwood's council membership carried the social authority of the Lockwood family's long prominence in Mystic Falls, his participation in the institution's work representing the continuation of a legacy that his family had maintained since the founding, the Lockwood name appearing in the council's oldest records alongside the Gilberts and the Fells and the Forbeses and the Salvatores, with the consistency of families who had understood their town's particular nature from the beginning and had committed to its management as inherited obligation. He was a man of considerable pride in that legacy and considerable investment in the town's reputation as a safe and stable community. His council work organized around protecting both the people of Mystic Falls and the image of the town that the founding families had always presented to the outside world. The two concerns occasionally in tension, in ways that he navigated with the instincts of a politician, rather than the instincts of someone for whom the human cost was always the primary consideration. Logan Fell entered the picture as a council-adjacent figure whose combination of genuine family connection to the institution and dramatic underestimation of what actual vampire hunting required made him simultaneously useful and dangerous in ways that the more experienced council members recognized without being able to entirely contain. He was a local news anchor, personable and ambitious, his founding family credentials genuine, and his enthusiasm for the council's work real. His understanding of what that work actually entailed in practice, organized more around the mythology of righteous vampire slaying than around the operational reality of encountering creatures that were faster and stronger and more ruthless than anything his preparation had equipped him to manage. He acquired the Gilbert Watch, the family heirloom device that could detect vampires through a mechanism its current users understood only partially, from the Gilbert family collection through means that combined legitimate council access with personal opportunism, the device giving him a sense of capability that his actual readiness did not support. The Gilbert Watch was an artifact with history that extended back to the original founding family activities of 1864. Its mechanism connected to the same period of intense supernatural management that had produced the council itself. The device functioning as detection instrument that identified the specific supernatural signature of vampire presence in ways that its current users could observe as outcome without fully understanding as mechanism. Jonathan Gilbert, Elena's ancestor, had been among the founding family members most deeply involved in the original purge. His journals and his artifacts reflecting the comprehensive engagement with the supernatural that had characterized that era's founding family activities. The watch one of several objects he had produced or acquired in connection with those events, whose significance extended beyond their apparent function. That it had come into Logan Fell's possession rather than remaining within the Gilbert family's careful stewardship was one of the small disruptions of the autumn that would eventually resolve into larger consequences than its modest scale initially suggested. Logan's amateur vampire hunting proceeded with the specific trajectory of someone who had significantly overestimated his own capability and significantly underestimated his subject. His use of the watch to identify vampire presence in Mystic Falls, providing him with information he lacked the operational sophistication to act on safely. He tracked, he observed, he attempted interventions that reflected more courage than judgment. His activities producing disruption in the supernatural landscape of the town that the more experienced players in that landscape navigated around with the ease of people accustomed to the unpredictable complications that uninformed human involvement in supernatural affairs reliably generated. His end came with the brutal efficiency that characterized encounters between adequately prepared vampires and inadequately prepared vampire hunters. His transformation into the thing he had been. Hunting representing the specific irony of someone whose understanding of the threat was sufficient to make him dangerous and insufficient to make him safe. He was turned by Damon, because most of the complications arising in Mystic Falls that autumn traced back to Damon if the line of causation was followed with sufficient persistence, the transformation reflecting the same impulsive logic that had characterized his turning of Vicky, the same willingness to create situations that produced immediate entertainment without adequate consideration of what those situations would generate as they developed. Logan, as newly turned vampire, was an exponentially more dangerous version of Logan as amateur vampire hunter. His human knowledge of the Council's operations and the town's defensive infrastructure, now in the hands of something with supernatural capability, and none of the ethical constraints that had previously limited what he was willing to do with that knowledge. He attacked Jenna, Summers, Eleanor's aunt and Jeremy's guardian, with the specific horror of violence landing close to someone Eleanor loved. The attack survived, but carrying the particular weight of the supernatural world's willingness to reach into ordinary domestic life without warning or adequate justification. His destruction came at the hands of Alaric Saltzman, the new history teacher at Mystic Falls High School, whose surface normalcy had been concealing a depth of purpose and grief that his professional performance gave no particular indication of. Alaric Saltzman had arrived in Mystic Falls not by accident, but by the specific trajectory of a man following the thread of his wife's disappearance through whatever leads it produced. His presence in the town, the result of research that had connected Isabel's last known movements to Mystic Falls and to the specific supernatural history of the place, that a person willing to look carefully at the available evidence could construct from public sources and private grief combined. He taught history with genuine engagement, was good with students in the unforced way of someone who actually found young people interesting, rather than simply tolerable, and carried the specific quality of someone with a private interior life that his professional exterior gave only occasional glimpses of. Isabel had been his wife, a doctoral student studying vampire mythology, when she disappeared in ways that official explanations could not account for satisfactorily, the circumstances of her vanishing pointing toward the supernatural in ways that Alaric had initially resisted, and then, through the process of following evidence wherever it led, accepted as the most accurate interpretation of what he had found. He believed she was dead, believed a vampire had killed her, and had organized the subsequent period of his life around finding the specific vampire responsible and achieving whatever resolution that finding would make possible. His grief transformed by purpose into something that functioned as forward momentum, even when the underlying emotion remained as raw and as unresolved as it had been in the immediate aftermath of her disappearance. He possessed a Gilbert ring, a piece of spelled jewelry connected to the same Emily Bennett magical tradition that had produced the Salvatore brothers' daylight rings and the various other enchanted artifacts distributed through Mystic Falls' supernatural history. This particular ring enchanted with the specific property of protecting its wearer from death caused by supernatural means. The ring had come to him through Isabel, who had acquired it through her research into Mystic Falls history and its artifacts, and Alaric wore it with the particular combination of genuine belief in its properties and the slightly unreal quality of someone who had not yet fully integrated the implications of living in a world where such properties were real and operational and relevant to his daily survival prospects. The ring had already saved his life at least once. The death that would otherwise have been permanent reversed by the enchantment, with the specific wrongness of waking up alive after something that should have been final. The disorientation of that experience, something he had processed in the private way. He processed most things of genuine significance. His staking of Logan Fell was not his first violent encounter with a vampire and would not be his last. His preparedness for that specific type of confrontation, the product of the months of deliberate preparation he had undertaken, since deciding that passive grief was insufficient response to what had happened to Isabel. He had learned what was required and had acquired what was necessary and had practiced with the specific seriousness of someone for whom the activity was not sport or adventure, but functional preparation for encounters that his presence in Mystic Falls made inevitable. His research having told him enough about the town's history to understand that arriving there unarmed and unprepared would have been equivalent to arriving nowhere at all. Logan Fell died the permanent death with the specific appropriateness of someone whose transformation into the thing he had been hunting had brought him into confrontation with someone better prepared than he had ever been. Alaric's trajectory toward the Salvatore brothers and toward Eleanor had the gradual quality of orbits that were always going to intersect given their respective positions and directions. His investigation of Mystic Falls' current supernatural situation eventually producing the information about Stefan and Damon that his research had been moving toward. His initial interactions with Stefan were organized around the specific antagonism of someone who had categorized all vampires as versions of the threat that had taken Isabel. His willingness to revise that categorization developing slowly through exposure to Stefan's evident commitment to a different way of existing, and through the practical recognition that the situation in Mystic Falls required coalition rather than simple opposition between anyone genuinely concerned with the human cost of what was occurring. His relationship with Elena carried the particular warmth of someone who recognized in her the specific quality of carrying loss with open eyes and continuing forward anyway. The recognition between two people who had both lost central figures in their lives and chosen engagement over withdrawal. The Gilbert family history was revealing itself to Elena with increasing depth and complexity as her access to her father's records and her new awareness of the supernatural context. Those records existed within combined to produce understanding that exceeded what the records alone would have produced. Grayson Gilbert had maintained documentation of the family's founding history with thoroughness that suggested genuine investment in that history's preservation rather than simple archival obligation. And Elena moved through those documents with the attentiveness of someone who was discovering that her family's past was not the background to the present, but actively constitutive of it. Not history in the sense of things that had ended, but history in the sense of things that were still operating through the present moment in ways that her own life was now demonstrating with personal specificity. The Gilbert ring that Alaric wore was one artifact among several whose existence she discovered through this research. The spelled objects connecting the Gilbert family's history to the Bennett witch tradition in ways that made the separateness of Mystic Falls' supernatural landscape increasingly difficult to maintain as an organizing assumption. The Council continued its autumn operations with the specific combination of genuine vigilance and incomplete information that characterized institutions managing threats they understood. Partially, the arrival of the Salvatore brothers and the supernatural disruptions connected to their return, producing the category of evidence that the Council's protocols were designed to identify without yet producing the specific information that would allow them to respond with the targeted precision that effective action required. Sheriff Forbes watched and documented and maintained the community's protective infrastructure with the steady professionalism of someone who understood that patience and preparation were the qualities that distinguished effective vampire management from the kind of impulsive action that Logan Fell had represented. His fate, a cautionary example of what happened when enthusiasm exceeded knowledge by the specific margin that made the difference between surviving an encounter and not surviving it. To understand the Salvatore brothers as they existed in the present required understanding them as they had existed before the present, before the transformation and the century of separation and the accumulated damage of 145 years of choosing opposite philosophies as their respective methods of surviving what had been done to them. It required going back to the Salvatore estate in the years before 1864, to the specific texture of what they had been to each other when being something to each other was still uncomplicated by the weight of everything that would follow. When the relationship between them was simply the relationship between brothers rather than the ongoing performance of mutual damage that it had become across the decades of their immortal existence. Darman had loved Stefan with a particular intensity that older siblings sometimes bring to younger ones when the age gap is sufficient to produce something closer to protectiveness than simple rivalry. His affection for his younger brother genuine and demonstrative, in ways that the social conventions of their time and place and their father's specific emotional style did not make easy, but that Damon had always been constitutionally resistant to suppressing simply because convention preferred. It suppressed. He had been the brother who taught Stefan to ride properly, who defended him in the specific social encounters of boyhood where defense was required, who recognized the quality of Stefan's sensitivity and his interiority as genuine rather than weakness in ways that their father consistently refused to do. The love had been real and uncomplicated in those early years, which was part of what made what came after so completely devastating. The depth of the original connection, providing the exact measure of what his destruction had cost. Stefan had admired Damon with the specific quality of admiration that younger siblings develop for older ones who possess qualities they recognize as extraordinary, without yet having the framework to understand as also being dangerous seeing the brilliance and the charisma and the fearless disregard for limits without yet fully perceiving the ways in which those same qualities in a person who had not been adequately loved or adequately contained could become the mechanism of his own destruction and the destruction of people around him. He had wanted to be like Damon in the way that younger brothers want to be like older ones who seem to move through the world with an ease that the younger has not yet achieved. His admiration genuine and persistent even as he developed the understanding that Damon's ease was partly performance and partly the specific absence of self-preservation instinct that looked like confidence from the outside. Giuseppe Salvatore had produced these two boys and then systematically failed them in ways that were specific to each and damaging to both. His expectations of Damon, organized around compliance and legacy and the performance of the Salvatore identity in ways that made no room for who Damon actually was. His response to Stefan's sensitivity and moral seriousness characterized by the particular impatience of a man who understood those qualities as impediments to the kind of decisive masculine authority he considered essential to a Salvatore son. He was not a villain in the simple sense of someone who wished his sons harm, his investments in them genuine as far as they went, but they did not go far enough into the actual interior lives of the people he had produced. His love for them organized around what they represented, rather than who they were, in ways that left both of them without the specific kind of being seen that children required to develop unimpaired. Catherine Pierce arrived into this configuration and understood it immediately. Her 4 centuries of surviving through the careful reading and the strategic deployment of other people's emotional needs, giving her the specific intelligence required to assess what both brothers wanted and needed, and to position herself as the answer to both sets of requirements simultaneously. She saw in Stefan someone whose moral seriousness and whose need to be loved for his genuine qualities rather than his social performance made him susceptible to the intimacy she could offer. And she saw in Damon someone whose hunger for recognition and whose contempt for convention made him susceptible to the particular quality of her attention that said she saw through everything he performed to something essential and extraordinary beneath it. She gave each of them something real enough to feel genuine while organizing her provision of that something around purposes that had nothing to do with either of their well-being. The specific cruelty of what she did, understood from the distance of a century and a half, was not simply that she had manipulated them, but that the manipulation had used real feelings on both sides as its medium, had taken genuine love and genuine longing, and had run her own current through it, without their knowledge or their consent, so that what they experienced as the most real and most important thing that had ever happened to them was simultaneously genuine feeling and someone else's calculation, the two things indistinguishable from the inside in ways that made subsequent trust in their own emotional perceptions genuinely difficult for both of them in different ways. Damon's discovery that Stefan had known Catherine was not in the tomb, that she had escaped in 1864 and had been free for the entire century and a half that Damon had spent organizing his existence around freeing her, came with the specific quality of devastation that only a betrayal of that particular duration could produce. 145 years, the entirety of his immortal existence given shape and direction and meaning by the belief that Catherine was waiting for him, sealed in the darkness beneath Fell's church. And Stefan had been carrying the knowledge of her freedom as private information he had chosen not to share. His reasons, whatever they were, insufficient to Damon in the moment of understanding what the silence had cost him. Every cruelty Damon had committed across those decades had been committed within the context of a purpose he now understood to have been built on false foundation. Every terrible thing he had done and been organized around a goal whose central premise had been wrong for 145 years, while his brother watched and said nothing. The specific nature of what Stefan knew and when he had known it, and why he had chosen silence over disclosure, was a question whose answer revealed the full complexity of his character and the full difficulty of the impossible position he had occupied since learning the truth about Catherine. He had discovered that Catherine was not in the tomb some years after his transformation. Through channels and circumstances that involved the specific intersection of his own investigations and information he had not been seeking but could not unknow once it had reached him. He had sat with this knowledge and had made the calculation that telling Damon would produce one of two outcomes, neither of which Stefan could accept as adequate justification for the disclosure. Either Damon would not believe him, would interpret the information as Stefan's attempt to destroy his purpose and his reason for continuing, and the telling would produce only intensified hostility and intensified suffering without any of the liberation that truth was supposed to provide. Or Damon would believe him, and the liberation from the false purpose would leave him with nothing. No organizing principle for his existence, no reason that had structured a century and a half that had just been revealed as built on illusion. And the nothing would be worse than the false something in ways that Stefan genuinely feared for his brother's survival. Neither of these calculations excused the silence, and Stefan knew that, carried the knowledge of it as one more layer of the guilt that he had been accumulating across his immortal existence, with the specific thoroughness of someone whose conscience was too active to allow him to set things down once he had picked them up. His relationship with his own guilt was one of the defining features of his psychology. The particular sensitivity that his father had dismissed as weakness revealing itself in immortality as the quality that made him both more humane and more self-destructive than circumstances required. His capacity to feel the weight of what he had done and what he had failed to do, never diminishing across the decades in the way that sustained guilt might have been expected to dull through sheer repetition. The ripper history that sat at the edges of Stefan's moral self-presentation was the darkest and most necessary complication to the simple narrative of him as the good brother, in contrast to Damon's bad one. The periods in his immortal existence when his control had failed, not partially, but completely, when the discipline and the self-monitoring and the animal blood diet had all collapsed under the weight of circumstances or injury, or the specific vulnerability he carried to human blood's particular pull on him, when his defenses were sufficiently compromised. A ripper, in the vocabulary that vampires used for the specific condition he had experienced, was a vampire whose relationship to feeding had lost its managed quality entirely, who killed without the restraint that civilized vampire existence required, who experienced the act of killing as something closer to ecstasy than to the grim functional necessity that Stefan's ordinary life treated it as. He had been this thing in periods he did not discuss and did not allow himself to dwell on, and Damon had witnessed those periods and had been present in the aftermath of them in ways that complicated the simple moral accounting that placed Stefan on one side of a line and Damon on the other. Damon had, in those darkest chapters of Stefan's existence, sometimes been the one to pull him back, his presence in the periods of Stefan's worst unraveling, not always as aggravating force, but occasionally as the specific anchor of someone who understood what his brother was experiencing from the inside rather than from the theoretical distance of those who had never felt that particular pull. This history between them, the history of Damon having saved Stefan from himself at moments when Stefan could not save himself, sat beneath the surface of their current antagonism as buried evidence of the original relationship, the love that had been present before Catherine and before the transformation and before the century of mutual damage, occasionally surfacing in moments neither of them particularly wanted to acknowledge, because acknowledgement will require both of them to revise the simpler narratives they had constructed about each other as ongoing justification for the distance they maintained. Their interactions in Mystic Falls that autumn carried all of this history in every exchange, the provocations and the counter-management and the specific quality of their mutual awareness operating as the surface expression of something that went far deeper than the present circumstances that had brought them back to the same house in the same town after decades of separately managed immortal existence. Damon's cruelties towards Stefan were not random or simply habitual, but precisely calibrated to the specific vulnerabilities that only someone who had known Stefan as deeply and as long as Damon had could accurately identify and target. His provocations finding the specific soft places with the efficiency of someone working from an intimate map, drawn across a lifetime of genuine closeness before the distance became the dominant mode. Stefan's management of Damon was similarly informed by knowledge that went beneath the surface of the present antagonism. His understanding of what drove his brother's behavior, giving his responses a quality of informed patience that was not simply tolerance, but something more complicated. The patience of someone who could perceive the grief beneath the performance without being able to address it directly, because Damon's defenses against direct address were essentially impenetrable by anyone who approached from the direction of sympathy. The approach that had any possibility of reaching Damon was the one organized around practical reality rather than emotional acknowledgement, around specific situations that required specific responses rather than around the underlying psychological territory that Damon had been refusing to inhabit honestly for over a century. There were moments in that autumn when the original relationship surfaced through the accumulated damage with the specific quality of something that had never entirely died, despite everything that had been done to it. Moments in which the brothers were simply in the same space, and the history between them produced something other than performance of mutual antagonism. A shared reference to something from their human years, some specific memory of the estate or their father, or an event from the 1850s that neither of them had anyone else in the world to share with, because the world in which those memories existed was gone, and they were the only surviving witnesses to it. The specific quality of those moments was not warmth exactly, not anything either of them would have been comfortable characterizing as warmth, but something that functioned as acknowledgement of the original reality beneath the constructed present, brief and quickly recovered from and important in ways that their respective performances required them not to make too visible. Eleanor observed the dynamic between them with the particular attention of someone for whom both of them mattered in different ways and at different registers. Her perception of Damon neither the simple fear that his behavior was designed to produce nor the simple hostility that his treatment of Caroline and his general destructiveness made a reasonable response, but something more complicated that took in the full picture, including the specific quality of pain, visible beneath the performance when the performance slipped in unguarded moments. She did not excuse what he did because she understood why he did it. That was not the nature of her perception, but she held both things simultaneously with the moral intelligence of someone who understood that explanation and excuse were different categories, and that having access to one did not require collapsing it into the other. Stefan told her, in the careful, incremental way he shared difficult truths about the 1864 history and about his understanding of how Damon had become what he was. His account of his brother's psychology carrying the specific authority of someone who had watched the transformation from the inside and understood its architecture better than any outside observer could. He did not defend Damon, was honest about the damage his brother caused and the reality of the threat he represented, but he framed the history with the generosity of someone who had never been able to entirely give up on the person his brother had been before the compounded losses of that terrible year had reorganized him into someone almost unrecognizable as that original person. The almost was doing significant work in that formulation. It was always the almost that mattered, the trace of the original person still visible beneath everything that had been constructed over it across a century and a half. The evidence that the construction was covering something rather than simply being what it appeared. The reason that both Stefan and Elena, from their respective positions and for their respective reasons, continued to look at Damon and see something that simple condemnation was insufficient to fully account for. The convergence of forces that had been building through the autumn months of 2009 arrived at its crisis point through the specific mechanism of Damon's single-minded pursuit of the one goal that had structured his entire immortal existence. The opening of the tomb beneath Fell's church, representing not simply a tactical objective, but the culmination of 145 years of accumulated purpose that he had never seriously examined and never genuinely allowed himself to doubt. Every cruelty he had committed, and every relationship he had weaponized, and every opportunity for something different he had refused across that century and a half, had been organized around the justification that it was all in service of this, that the end waiting in the darkness beneath the church made the means not merely acceptable, but necessary, and the approaching moment of that end's achievement carried the specific weight of everything that had been sacrificed to reach it. Emily. Bennett's crystal was the instrument through which the tomb seal could be broken. The artifact representing the mechanism of reversal that Emily had built into her original spell, with the particular foresight of someone who understood that magic of that magnitude and that permanence required an exit as well as an entrance, a way to undo what had been done that would prevent the working from becoming irreversible in ways that exceeded even its intended scope. The crystal had passed from Emily's possession to Damon's through the arrangement they had made in the immediate aftermath of the 1864 events, Emily providing the artifact as insurance against her own death, and as the specific instrument of the future liberation she had built into the spell's architecture. Damon accepting it as part of the transaction without fully understanding everything that Emily had woven into the crystal's enchantment beyond its stated function. He had carried it across 145 years with the care of someone maintaining the most important object in his possession, its presence a constant material reminder of his purpose and his promise to himself about what his existence was moving toward, the physical weight of it, in whatever form he kept it across the decades, a grounding reality during periods when the abstraction of his goal threatened to dissolve under the pressure of time's passage and the specific exhaustion of sustaining singular purpose across a century without the ordinary human mechanisms of renewal and revision that mortality provided. He needed a Bennett witch to channel the power required to activate the crystal and break the seal, which was why his return to Mystic Falls had been specifically timed to coincide with his awareness that Sheila Bennett's granddaughter was coming into her power. The pieces of his plan aligning with the patience of someone who had learned that the appropriate response to obstacles was not frustration but the extended application of strategic waiting. Bonnie's resistance to being used as instrument of Damon's plan was immediate and grounded in the genuine moral clarity that characterized her approach to the supernatural world. She was still in the process of accepting as real and relevant to her life. She understood through Sheila's explanations and through her own growing sensitivity to the supernatural landscape of Mystic Falls that opening the tomb would release not only Catherine Pierce, who was in any case not present within it, but the remaining vampires who had been sealed there since 1864, vampires who had been in supernatural suspension for 145 years without feeding, and who would emerge in a state of hunger and disorientation that made them immediately and indiscriminately dangerous to the human population of Mystic Falls and its surrounding area. The scale of that danger was not abstract to her, but specific and personal, organized around the faces of the people she loved who lived in the town that the emerging vampires would treat as feeding ground. The Founders' Day celebration provided the context within which the crystal's final arc played out. The town's annual commemoration of its own founding, creating the specific irony of community celebration, coinciding with the activation of forces connected to the most violent episode in that founding history. Emily Bennett's spirit moved through the celebration with the particular presence of someone who had been watching the approach of this moment across the generations of her descendants' lives, her awareness of what the crystal's activation would set in motion, informing the decision she had apparently always been prepared to make if this specific contingency arose. She possessed Bonnie at the founder's party with the quality of a presence that was not hostile, but was absolutely not negotiable. Emily inhabiting her descendant's body with the specific purpose of the dead returning to address unfinished business that the living had been moving toward without full understanding of its implications. Through Bonnie's voice and Bonnie's body, she spoke to Damon with the directness of someone who had made her peace with what she was about to do and was not interested in the negotiations that his fury would attempt to initiate. Her message clear and her action immediate, and her reasons larger than his single purpose could accommodate or override. She destroyed the crystal, not as betrayal of the arrangement she had made with him in 1864, but as the fulfillment of a responsibility that had always existed alongside that arrangement, and that the specific circumstances of the present moment had activated with the clarity of something whose time had arrived. Damon's rage at the crystal's destruction was the rage of someone whose last 145 years had just been retroactively emptied of their organizing justification. The specific quality of his fury carrying beneath its surface the first intimations of the grief that would eventually be required to replace the purpose that had just been destroyed. He attacked Bonnie with the immediate violence of someone whose emotional regulation had been entirely overwhelmed by the scale of what had just been taken from him. The attack interrupted by Stefan's intervention. The physical confrontation between the brothers playing out against the background of the celebration, continuing around them with the specific unreality of extraordinary events occurring within ordinary contexts. Bonnie survived, shaken and disoriented from the experience of Emily's possession. The aftermath of the spirit's inhabitation of her body, leaving her with knowledge and with questions, and with a significantly expanded understanding of what her lineage carried and what it would continue to be asked to carry as Mystic Falls' supernatural history continued to unfold around her. Sheila's response to what had occurred through her granddaughter was the response of someone who had understood the possibility of such demands being made on the Bennett line and had been preparing Bonnie for their reality without being able to specify exactly when or in what form they would arrive. Damon opened the tomb regardless, finding another witch, through means that reflected the specific determination of someone who had not yet processed the enormity of what the crystal's destruction meant, because processing it would require him to stop moving. And the one thing he was not yet capable of doing was stopping. He descended into the darkness beneath Fell's Church, with the accumulated anticipation of 145 years reaching its terminal point, the specific quality of that moment carrying everything he had told himself this would mean when it finally arrived, and found the tomb's interior containing the vampires who had been sealed there since 1864 in their state of suspended but conscious imprisonment, their awareness restored by the seal's breaking, their hunger immediate and overwhelming and organized around the first available source of the blood that would restore them to full function. Catherine Pierce was not among them. The specific emptiness of that discovery had the quality of a wound that the body has not yet registered as serious because the shock of it is still processing through the system. Damon standing in the tomb's darkness and understanding with the specific clarity of something that could not be misinterpreted, that the central premise of his existence had been wrong, that the woman he had spent 145 years preparing to free had been free for the entirety of that time, that she had escaped in 1864 and had never been in the tomb that he had organized his immortal life around opening, the century of waiting and suffering and cruelty committed in service of a purpose that had been based on force. Information collapsed inward with the specific devastation of something structural failing. The entire architecture of meaning he had constructed over that century revealing itself as built on a foundation that had never been solid. Stefan's knowledge surfaced in Damon's awareness with a specific addition of betrayal to devastation. The understanding that his brother had known had been carrying the truth about Catherine's freedom as private information across years of their shared immortal existence, transforming the grief of discovering the false premise into the compounded grief of discovering that the false premise had not been simply an error, but a maintained silence, a choice that Stefan had made repeatedly across the time they had been in the same proximity, and during which disclosure would have been possible. The vampires who emerged from the tomb were the immediate practical consequence of the seal's breaking. Their emergence into a present that was a century and a half removed from the world they had last consciously inhabited, producing the specific disorientation of people whose entire frame of reference for reality had become historical artifact during their suspension. Pearl and Anna among them, their story carrying its own dimensions that the simple category of dangerous freed vampires was inadequate to contain. Pearl had been a significant figure in the Catherine Pierce circle of 1864. Her relationship with the Salvatore family history predating Catherine's arrival and extending into the specific texture of the town's supernatural past in ways that her emergence into the present would continue to reveal. Anna had been conducting her own investigation of the tomb's history from outside it, her relationship with Jeremy Gilbert providing her with access to the human world of present-day mystic fools that she had been using with the specific patience of someone working toward a goal that required time and proximity rather than direct action. Anna and Jeremy's connection had developed with the organic quality of genuine feeling operating within circumstances that made its full expression complicated from the beginning. Anna's actual nature and actual purpose concealed from Jeremy through the combination of her own careful management and his genuine unawareness of the supernatural context within which their relationship existed. She had sought him out deliberately. Her interest in the Gilbert family connection to the tomb and to the artifacts and records that might help her reach Pearl, organized around purpose, without being reducible to it. Something real and human in a response to Jeremy developing, alongside the strategic logic that had initially directed her attention toward him. His grief and his searching quality and his genuine kindness beneath the performed indifference resonated with her in ways that her 2 centuries of immortal existence had not entirely eliminated the capacity to feel. The specific warmth of his company, something she had not anticipated valuing as genuinely as she found herself doing. Eleanor's discovery of her own adoption arrived through the specific mechanism of research that had been moving toward the truth without her fully anticipating where it was heading. The Gilbert family records that she had been examining in the context of understanding Mystic Falls' supernatural history, containing documentation that, when assembled with the specific attention of someone looking for patterns rather than simply cataloging contents, revealed that Grayson and Miranda Gilbert had taken in a baby girl whose biological origins were not recorded in any of the documents that should have contained that information if the birth had been what it appeared. The absence was the evidence, the specific shape of the missing documentation pointing toward adoption, rather than simply incomplete record keeping. The careful arrangement of what was present and what was absent suggesting deliberate management of information rather than ordinary archival incompleteness. She brought this discovery to Jenna, who confirmed it with the specific quality of someone who had been carrying the knowledge of a secret that was not hers to share, and who felt the specific relief and the specific guilt of that secret finally being released from her keeping. Her account of what she knew both more and less than Elena needed. Jenna herself having only partial information about the circumstances of Elena's adoption, and none at all about the biological parentage that the adoption had replaced in the family's official history. Grayson and Miranda had told Jenna only what they had decided she needed to know, which was that Elena had come to them as infant and was theirs in every way that mattered. The specifics of her origins information they had kept within their own confidence for reasons that Jenna had respected without fully understanding. The connection between Elena's unknown biological origins and Isabel, Alaric's missing wife, existed in the evidence as a thread that had not yet been pulled to its full length, but whose presence was becoming increasingly visible to anyone paying careful attention to the convergence of information that Mystic Falls Autumn had been generating. Isabel had been researching vampire mythology with specific attention to Mystic Falls when she disappeared, her research having brought her to the town and to the specific history of the founding families, and to questions about the doppelganger bloodline that connected Catherine Pierce's face to Elena's in ways that went beyond simple resemblance into supernatural significance. The doppelganger mythology, the supernatural meaning of the specific face that Catherine and Elena shared across the centuries, was a thread running beneath the surface of everything that had occurred that autumn, its full dimensions not yet visible, but its presence increasingly felt in the convergence of attention that various supernatural forces were directing toward Elena with a specificity that exceeded anything that could be explained by her relationship with Stefan alone. Mystic Falls closed its autumn carrying these threads into winter with the specific quality of a place whose surface had been disturbed enough that the return to undisturbed normalcy was no longer genuinely available. The tomb open and its occupants loose in the world, Elena's origins uncertain, and her resemblance to Catherine newly charged with implications she could not yet fully assess. The Salvatore brothers in their boarding house, navigating the specific aftermath of Damon's discovery about Catherine. With whatever resources a century and a half of accumulated damage and the occasional surfacing of original feeling provided them. The town moved into the cold months carrying more truth than it had held at the summer's end. The secrets it had maintained, with such practiced ease for so long, having shifted in their arrangement beneath the surface in ways that made their continued containment a project of different character than it had been before, requiring different effort and producing different costs than the ordinary maintenance of Mystic Falls' long-established relationship with its own hidden history. And so Mystic Falls settles into its winter quiet, carrying its secrets into the cold months the way it has always carried them, beneath the surface of a town that looks ordinary to those who have not learned to feel the weight underneath. Elena Gilbert came into this autumn as a girl defined by grief and left it as something more complicated and more complete. A person who had chosen to see the world as it actually was, rather than as it was easier to believe it might be. Stefan Salvatore found in her the reason he had been searching for without fully admitting he was searching. And Damon, stripped at last of the purpose that had carried him through a century and a half, stood at the threshold of something he had no name for yet. The tomb is open. The truth about Elena's origins is only beginning to surface, and Catherine Pierce, free for 145 years, is somewhere in the world that doesn't yet know she is coming. So rest now, gentle dreamers. Let Mystic Falls hold its mysteries a little longer tonight, and let the darkness carry you softly into peaceful, dreamless sleep. Good night.